Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the annual Jo Cox Memorial Lecture. Jo was a student here at Pembroke in the mid-1990s. She is much missed, both here in Pembroke and in the political and national life of the UK. It's an honour for us to be able to host the Jo Cox Memorial Lecture, and I'm particularly delighted that Jo's parents and husband and children and parents-in-law have been able to join us for this evening. A very warm welcome to you all. But also, I'm particularly delighted that Jo's sister Kim Leadbeater, who is now wonderfully the MP for Batley and Spen, which was Jo's old seat, is also here with us. And I'm going to hand over to Kim to say a word or two and to introduce Sayeeda, who is our speaker. Kim.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that warm welcome. Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all. It's nice and cosy in here. I hope you know the person sat next to you quite well. If you don't now, you will do in about an hour. So thank you so much. As Chris said, for anybody that doesn't know me, my name's Kim Leadbeater, and I have the honour and privilege of being Jo's sister. And I'm speaking on behalf of Jo's family this evening, including, as Chris said, our parents, and her, not our, children. I want to start by saying a number of very important thank yous to the university, to Cambridge, particularly the Department of Sociology, to the college, to Pembroke College, and to the master, Chris, for hosting us this evening and for also putting me up in quite a swanky room for the night. So thank you. And I also want to say thank you to the Jo Cox Foundation, the charity that we set up in Jo's name after she was killed, for helping to organise the event as well. And everybody else behind the scenes, some would say perhaps the most important people, the technical people and the people who do all the organising, for getting us all here successfully and safely this evening. And of course, a massive thank you to all of you for attending. It's a pleasure to be in the room together after the sacrifices that we've all had to make over the last couple of years. Although, having travelled down from Yorkshire today, Mum and Dad and I have had to make a sacrifice, admittedly of a very different nature, but our football team, Huddersfield Town, are in the playoffs tonight, playing for a place to get to Wembley for possible promotion to the Premier League. So we are a bit distraught about that, but also very, very glad to be here. And if you see my dad checking his phone, he's not being rude. Actually, he doesn't know how to check his phone, so that's not going to happen. But yeah, and I was very pleased this afternoon to see Jo's children punting on the river in their Huddersfield Town shorts, keeping it real. And I've got no doubt that whatever happens on the pitch tonight, we will have a winning lecture here. No pressure, Sayeeda. Seriously, this lecture means a lot to our family, and we are absolutely delighted to be here. We've always been really honest about the challenges that Jo faced here at Cambridge. She felt very out of her comfort zone as a working class northerner who was at that time actually pretty shy and lacking confidence, and she missed home terribly. But she also made some lifelong friendships and met some kindred spirits, and I'm really pleased that some of those friends are here with us this evening and are now very much my friends too. Being at Cambridge also enabled Jo to build on the values that we'd learnt during our childhood and to solidify her vision of the world and her desire to make a difference. Even though it wasn't always easy here, I know that she learnt a lot about the world and indeed about herself. Now, Jo was a strong, proud northern woman, a successful Yorkshire parliamentarian, a true humanitarian, and a very proud mum. And I think it's fair to say those are all descriptions we could use for tonight's speaker, Baroness Sayeeda Warsi. Despite their different political affiliations, and no doubt many other differences as well, I think it would be fair to say that Jo and Sayeeda also have quite a lot in common. Both were born at Dewsbury Hospital, had successful careers before entering politics, and they championed a range of issues that they cared about deeply. Gender equality, social mobility, and the promotion of religious understanding, to name a few. They broke down barriers and they challenged the norm. I've only known Sayeeda for a short time, but she's made me really welcome in Parliament, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her lecture tonight. I'm sure there'll be some interesting points for all of us to think about as she discusses the really important subject of culture wars. Ladies and gentlemen, Baroness Sayeeda Warsi.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for that very, very kind introduction. And it is a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. Often, as parliamentarians, we're asked to come and talk about issues, and you go to these places because you may like the place that you're going to. You sometimes go because you may like the subject matter that you're being asked to speak about. And you sometimes go because you really believe in the person in whose honour or memory you're giving the lecture in. But it's quite rare for all three to come together. And so when I was asked to do this lecture, it was very hard for me to say no. It's also generally very hard to say no to Kim. But I met Jo when she was first selected for the 2015 election. And as soon as she was selected, she reached out in typical Jo way. She was fighting the seat of Batley and Pembroke, which was the seat next door to the seat that I had fought in 2010. And she called me up and she said, look, I know you're a Conservative, we may have differences on our politics, but there are issues that worry me and issues that worry you too. And I'd like us to work together and do an event together. And I said, fine, I'm happy with this, let's go ahead, let's organise this. And so we went ahead and we organised this event at the PKWA Centre in Batley, which some of you who are from that area will know. And as the event was about to start, about half an hour before the event was about to start, I got a phone call. And it said number 10 switchboard. And I thought, what's going on? What's so exciting that here I am receiving a phone call from the Prime Minister's office? So I picked up the call and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff was on the phone. And he said, we need to speak, it's quite urgent. And I said, well, I'm just about to go into an event. And he said, no, we need to speak, it's quite urgent. And I think it's about the event that you're about to go into. And I said, okay, go ahead. He said, well, we have it on authority that you are just about to defect from the Conservative Party. so I said, come again. He said, well, we have it on authority that you're just about to defect from the Conservative Party. And I said, look, where you will be right is if there is anybody who can convince somebody like me to leave the Conservative Party and join her tribe, it would be Jo. But what I can say to you is that if I was going to defect, I wouldn't do it in Batley on a Sunday afternoon. So you can tell the Prime Minister to rest. But that was kind of the way Jo was. She had this amazing ability to be able to bring together people from all sorts of different backgrounds to work together. From Burma to Syria, from safe motherhood to anti-slavery work, from poverty to Palestine, she leaves a legacy. And she achieved in 13 months as a Member of Parliament that so many do not after a lifetime in politics. And the phrase that overwhelmingly stands out is more in common. And that's why I chose today's title, something that is in stark contrast to Jo's philosophy, Culture Wars, an attempt to divide. Now, I'm sure most of us in this room have both heard the term culture wars, first coined some 30 years ago in the United States, and feel relatively confident about what it means. But the definition that I want to give today is that it is a narrative that supports and promotes a very particular interpretation of a society's major political fault lines. And it then promotes language, policy and actions to mobilise our fellow citizens accordingly. And in doing so, provides simplistic but divisive answers to complex political issues. Now, some of you could argue that politics itself is divisive, except I would argue that what enables conflict and disagreement in politics to remain a positive force is the anticipation of change, an acceptance that you too will have a fair opportunity to implement and effect change, the promise that through democracy of having a battle of ideas, you could be given a chance to govern. But for this promise to hold, for politics to remain cohesive, the institutions that enable democracy to work must remain trusted and respected, something which sadly we have seen start to fall victim to culture wars. The storming of the Capitol in the US in January was the most stark manifestation of this, when democracy itself, democratically elected representatives and democratic institutions were seen as fair game, and attempts were made to overturn election results through violence. Thankfully, the UK has not hit this dark phase yet, nor had this moment of shame. But sadly, where the US goes on culture wars, the UK often follows. And that is why culture wars aren't just an ugly political phenomena, they are deeply dangerous and have the potential to stop and reverse, as we're seeing in the US, our steady journey towards liberal, inclusive societies. From women's rights to reproductive rights, from racial justice to freedom of religion and belief, from LGBTQ rights to other minority rights, culture wars have picked their battles. Statues, history, institutions and wealth connected to the slave trade, Black Lives Matter, taking the knee, trans rights. We've all seen them play out in the media. And in the UK, from its early timid manifestations of framing Britishness in ways that created in-groups and those that didn't matter and belong, to more recent sinister manifestations of attacks on fundamental institutions like the judiciary. Who can forget that appalling front page, enemies of the state? Polling last year showed an increasing awareness of the term culture wars in the UK, but a disparate understanding of its local manifestations. Internationally, in the UK, we are just below average when polled on whether we feel that our country is divided by culture wars. We're at 32%, far below the 3 countries which stand ahead of all others. South Africa at 58%, India at 57%, and the US at 57%. Places where citizens are most likely to feel that their country is divided by culture wars. Countries across the globe are facing this challenge. However, with South Africa's history, and until Biden, the US and India being led by extreme right-wing political parties, their ranking is not a surprise. Across the world, populists are reducing complex political issues to simplistic questions of belonging, and then framing disagreement with their view as illegitimate, often framing themselves as patriots and defenders of the ordinary man against a liberal elite who is out of touch at best and is a traitor at worst. Those forced into the elite camp are often anything but elite. For example, black men protesting against police brutality, while those representing the ordinary man, Trump or Modi, for example, share little in common with the ordinary man. They use culture war to place on the back burner, even if momentarily, and often to political advantage, the need to find economic answers to economic challenges. Challenges faced both by the BLM protester and the Make America Great Again underprivileged white man. Both sides of the presented divide feel unheard, marginalized, and are outraged. An outrage that is fed by the media and politicians for clicks, viewerships, and votes. So economic polarization plays out through symbolic polarization, with the economic disadvantaged blaming fellow citizens, not those in power. And economic inequality feeds and sustains the fight for status and equality. And so it plays out. One may not be able to access institutions because of racial injustice, but one can support the fight to take down statues and rename buildings. Another may not be able to access decent housing, but he can vote Brexit and feel empowered by taking back control. Now, I accept populism isn't uniquely responsible for polarization, but what marks it out as unique to other factors is that populism's key strategy is polarization. And whilst both right and left-wing populists divide citizens into homogenous groups, where right-wing populists become dangerously divisive is where they seek to define who the authentic citizen is, the patriot, in contrast to groups that don't authentically belong, often triggering disharmony, sometimes violence, and in extreme cases, genocide. The Rohingya community in Burma is a stark example. The homogenization of groups is something that has preoccupied my political journey, and the war on terror was an early manifestation of a complex issue which in the end became a discussion through the prism of culture wars. Conversations on counter-terrorism morphed into headlines on beards and burqas. And necessary national security legislation was drafted in terms that othered, with ramifications that we are still living with today. Watching this policy making up close, both with a seat at the table and a seat in British Muslim communities, I saw one of the first culture wars playing out, waged against British Muslims, and coupled with a policy of disengagement which has now been in play since 2007, they were the first victims of cancel culture and remain so. I've spent a lifetime of policy making in this area, trying to decouple the easy, lazy, populist answer from a pragmatic, workable solution rooted in our values. Let me give you a topical example. We have, over the last 20 years, increased the grounds upon which we can strip our fellow citizens of their citizenship. We started it to deal with an individual case of Abu Hamza, and that started a slippery slope where we now have a position where citizenship security is not determined by what you do to damage your country, but by your heritage. We now have a policy which targets 40% of our ethnic minority communities, many born and raised here and who have never held any other nationality and have known nowhere else to be home. They are the somewheres that are being told they don't belong. We now have laws that have created different classes of citizenship. We are no longer equal before the law, thus destroying a fundamental British value. So whilst we supposedly fight to preserve tradition and culture and heritage, often symbolic, by waging culture wars, we destroy the values that underpin our tradition, our culture, and our heritage. In an attempt to other others, we damage ourselves. In the US, a version of this phenomenon has been described as plutocratic popularism, a position that combines culture wars with economic positions that are actually unfavourable and sometimes even unpopular with the voters that populism seeks to represent, but which are eclipsed by the focus on the existential threat. A UK example may be those that voted Brexit, knowing the company they work for may or would relocate and thus they would lose their own jobs. Or more recently, the DUP's position on Brexit and the current crisis that now engulfs them. So ladies and gentlemen, are we doomed? Or can we roll back before we see the fallout we witnessed earlier this year in the US? I believe we can. But it requires a long-term commitment, patience to see it through, and a belief that what makes us a nation is deeper than flags and fanfare. I've argued for many years that national cohesion is as necessary as national security and needs to be funded and supported as such. I've asked for many years for a specific department that unites our four nations and the diverse communities within them. A department for national integration and identity, and it's needed now more than ever. We can become a country that focuses its energy and resources on building walls and policing boat crossings in the Channel and allegedly protecting and defending our citizens with rhetorical sound bites, or we can prioritise building bridges between our citizens. A divided country may help win elections, but it doesn't build a nation. What some perceive as changing the fabric of the society as we know it is often a call, a plea for recognition, a seek for social justice, to be included. So let's include them. We need to find ways that build inclusive nationalism, a common purpose, honest with the recognition of the good and bad of the past, not to erase all remnants of the past, not even erasing the celebrated statues of those whose past isn't necessarily all to be celebrated. They are still a part of our history, and they should remain, but remain in an environment which reflects their actions, both good and bad. We need to be less offended at what leaders of the past did wrong, and instead be incensed at what is wrong now. We need to stop setting up existential threats to our country, the judges, human rights, the wrong kind of refugees, and focus on how we are undermining the very values we are seeking to preserve: democracy, the rule of law, an international rules-based system. We need to find the language that is befitting of leadership. To not delegitimize grievances. There is nothing abstract about not wanting to be shot by the police. Implement a workable process for press regulation. Over a decade on from the Leveson inquiry, its recommendations largely remain ignored. And most importantly, build financially inclusive opportunities. We cannot continue to allow a world where some of the richest in the world make the least contributions. We cannot allow billions of revenue around the world to remain untaxed and unaccountable. We need to find ways to walk in others' shoes, to create space for conversations like the Jo Cox Foundation does, and take comfort from the fact that even when the state excludes, the excluded want to be a part of state institutions. The state still matters to them. They want to belong. They want to matter. And the way successive excluded and disengaged Muslim groups and organizations have sought to engage with government is one such example. Even at its most extreme, the perceived legitimacy of the most draconian laws and policies also depend on them commanding public confidence that they respect human rights and are compatible with the requirements of the rule of law. So, ladies and gentlemen, culture wars, in the end, are a struggle to define who we are. And who we are is less about symbols and more about values. Values of tolerance, equality before the law, respect for human dignity with a commitment to human rights, caring for those less fortunate, a voice for the voiceless, and inclusion and space for the marginalized. Values which underpinned who Jo was as a Labour parliamentarian, but values which underpin my political beliefs as a One Nation Tory. It's why I proudly define myself as someone who is ever vigilant to injustice, ever willing to call it out, indeed to be steadfast in my duty to do so by remaining proudly woke. And despite the attempts to cancel me, will keep speaking out. Thank you for the opportunity to do so today.
Thank you very much indeed, Sayeeda. Some very thought-provoking ideas there.